And now we're going to begin our afternoon discussing a topic that is of particular interest to so many of you here, how geospatial technologies are going to help shape the future of mobility. And to lead this discussion, we are honored to have Dr. Diana Liverman, who in just a couple of hours from now will receive the Alexander and Ilse Melamed Medal from AGS. Diana, we're eager to hear from you and your panel.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. Some fascinating talks on mobility. I was particularly concerned with mobility yesterday when my flight was 3 hours late, and it then took me 2 hours to get a ride from LaGuardia. So I hope you guys can help fix that the next time I'm coming. So this session is on how geospatial technology is shaping mobility and vice versa. And we're going to think about how geospatial tech is shaping the planet, making business more effective and efficient, and improving lives around the world. And we have three really interesting speakers. I'm just going to make a couple of comments about each of them because you have their bios, and then we'll go into their presentations and Q&A. So our first speaker is Giles Rhys-Jones. He's the Chief Marketing Officer for What 3 Words, which you're going to learn all about, New Global Addressing System. He's based out of London, and the tagline that caught my attention is making the world a safer, more efficient, and less frustrating place. That definitely speaks to my experience last night. The next speaker will be Rhys Horacek. And Rhys is a strategic account executive for SpaceTime Insight. And the tagline I found for him was predicting, optimizing, and visualizing networks. He's an expert on supply chains, and he's got a master's in geography, which I was really delighted to discover, from Oklahoma State University. And then our third speaker will be Keith Dierkx, and he's the director of the IBM Global Rail Innovation Center, which I believe is based in Beijing. And he's a member of IBM's Industrial Academy, which is the leading thinkers in IBM. Got a long background in rail and multimodal. But the most interesting thing I found looking up you on the internet is you actually have a degree in the history of science for UC Berkeley. So to have someone who understands history of technology looking to the future is particularly interesting. So why don't we get started with Giles?
Thank you. Hi. So at What 3 Words, we've come up with a really simple way to talk about locations, because addressing around the world is not very good. And it's not fit for the way that we live today, and it's not fit for the mobility that we're going to need in the future. Because if I go to a Google map of a favela in Brazil, there's maybe 7 or 8 roads, a couple with street names, and I flip through to satellite view, and actually what I see is hundreds of roads, thousands of homes and businesses that are quite literally not on the map. They don't have an address. And that's a problem, because if you don't have an address, you can't vote. It's difficult to get aid. It's difficult to get deliveries. You're essentially invisible to the state. And the UN say that there's about 4 billion people in the world who don't have an address, which is a challenge. So 75% of the countries in the world don't have a well-maintained street addressing system at all. And so that is in the places you would expect, like the favelas in Brazil, but actually it's much closer to home. So if I jump in my car today and I say, take me to, Park Street in New Jersey, there's 10 different Park Streets in New Jersey. And the car says, so which one do you want to go to? I've got to pull over, press a few knobs, and actually select. There's a huge amount of duplication in street addresses. And they're just not built for voice input. Trying to distinguish, or getting a car to try and distinguish between which one of those that you're saying is actually quite a challenge. And when you don't have a steering wheel and pedals in your car, actually being able to precisely say where you want to go becomes really quite important, because you can't go, yeah, just a little bit on the left, yep, that's it, thanks, mate. So coming here this morning, type into Google the building name, pin drops in the center of the building. So I wander around a bit trying to find the right entrance. There are 3 that I managed to find. Obviously, the last one was the correct one. Now, that was vaguely frustrating for me, and it took me a couple of minutes to do that. If I'm a delivery person, I'm doing that 100 times a day. That's a significant impact on efficiencies. If I'm a first responder, actually, some of the issues become, and the implications become much more serious. And of course, many places in the world just don't have an address. And you still want to talk about location. So if you're meeting someone for a picnic or camping or going to a festival or an event, trying to tell someone a precise location is challenging. And people have said this, geospatial industry is worth an enormous amount of money, and it's fundamental to businesses. It's core to businesses, and yet there's no really simple way to talk about locations, no consistent way. You have these guys, fantastic, love them, brilliantly accurate, and they're fantastic if you're a computer or a highly trained professional. But you very rarely get people saying, hey, let's go for a pint. I'll meet you at 25 degrees, 9 seconds, 40.9. It's just impossible. And if you mix up, if I misread that 1 and I type in a 7, I still go to a hillside in Rome. I'm just an hour north of Rome instead of an hour south. I can't see that I've made a mistake. So it's just not fit for purpose. So at What 3 Words, what we've done is come up with a user-friendly version of GPS coordinates. Now, this should be a film to play. There you go. So we've divided the world up into 57 trillion 10-foot by 10-foot squares, and we've given each one of those squares a 3-word address. So 3 dictionary words to describe any spot on the planet. So literally, wherever you are in the world, whether you're surveying, emergency response, delivery, all of a sudden you can very, very, very simply talk about that precise location. Now, the reason we chose words is because your ability to remember 3 words, to hold those 3 words in your short-term memory is near perfect. Your ability to remember GPS coordinates is 0. There's a bunch of other people that have recognized this problem, and they all add the alphabet to numbers, and they come up with an alphanumeric system. But your ability to remember those is really difficult too. And so words are much more memorable. And then you can do some really interesting things with words. So what we've done is a non-hierarchical system, which annoys a lot of people. We've put similar sounding words really far apart. This is not a navigation system, this is a point reference system. So table chair damp, America, table chair lamp, Australia. So if you make a tiny error, it's really obvious to you, and it's really obvious to a machine. So we can say, I think you meant that one because you're 5 miles away. That's the beauty of using words. And then we've put shorter, more memorable words in places that speak those languages. So we've got lots of short English words here in New York. But we're in 14 other languages, and every single system is a unique system. You don't need to tell the system which language you're using. It will automatically recognize it. We've taken out things like homophones. Here is in listen, here is in location. We've taken out rude words. In our Arabic version, we've taken out alcoholic words to make it as easy as possible for people to use. And then next year, we're launching 14 more languages as well. This is not an address replacement system. This is an addendum. If you've got an address system that works really well for you, then keep using it. If, however, you sometimes struggle to get deliveries, you can use us as an addendum, as a kind of super postcode. And then obviously in places that don't have addresses, we work wonderfully. So we have an app that people can use, and it's free to download, and people are using it all over the world. But then we have code, and our code is being integrated into other businesses. We're in about 170 countries, 600 businesses are now using 3-word addresses. We've also been built, that's a slightly hairier version of me, with Jack from Esri, who have integrated us into their platform. We're also in QGIS and a bunch of other GIS infrastructure tools, so you can use it really, really simply. But people are just listing us on their Contact Us pages. All of the youth hostels in the UK have now got a 3-word address. This plastics company uses it on their website. This photographer, every single photograph he takes, he uses the 3-word address. Next time you're in Ireland and you pick up a tourist authority brochure, they're listing the 3-word addresses of all of their properties in there. you want to get a taxi, a bike taxi in Delhi, you can get picked up from a 3-word address and dropped off at a 3-word address as well. And next time you're in Mongolia, you can order Pizza Hut to a 3-word address. And if you use a 3-word address, you'll get some free wedges because it means they can be that much more efficient. So they're incentivizing usage. Tonga will deliver mail in their electric tuk-tuk to a 3-word address. And Djibouti have released a series of limited edition stamps, each featuring a 3-word address. You kind of get the point. And then this is, I think it's like a version of rugby. It's a softer version of rugby, Super Bowl thing. And actually, we were used in the whole coordination of the security around Super Bowl 50, because shouting GPS coordinates down a field radio in a pressure situation, massively prone to error. And so actually, they use 3-word addresses to organize responses. In Denver, there are 54,000 fire hydrants. Each has got a 3-word address because it's a location, but also a unique reference point for the fire hydrant as well. And then we did a test in London, which is apparently the best addressed city in the world. We did one thing right. And we gave these 2 couriers 20 packages each. We've subsequently repeated this with thousands of packages, but in London we gave a guy 20 with street addresses on and 20 with 3-word addresses on. And the guy with 3-word addresses was 30% faster than the guy without. So that's 3.5 hours across the day that he saved. Now, UPS have said if they can save each of their drivers 1 mile per driver per day, that's $50 million saving. And then you look at the amount of cars that you take off the road and the congestion and the pollution that you remove just from having a slightly better addressing system. Next year, you'll be able to get into a Mercedes production vehicle, press a navigation system and say 3 words. It will recognize it. Because it's only searching for about 500 miles around the car, it can be really accurate. If you make a massive error, it goes, actually, I think you meant that, because there's only 1 in 150,000 that's vaguely like what you've just said. We've been built into IBM's Watson's Ollie autonomous vehicle, so you can get in there and say 3-word addresses. And we've just been built into Amazon Alexa for controlling drones and doing drone deliveries in Costa Rica. But our model is it's a proprietary system, and we charge a fee to do that. But we want to make it as accessible as possible. So for individuals, it's free. For NGOs and charities, there's a nominal fee or it's free. And then for business who can make or save an enormous amount of money, we levy a charge, as you would expect. But we're being used in Haiti to install water points. We were recently used by the Mexican government to in the response to the earthquake in Mexico City. And then down in Durban, in the townships, we are giving people 3-word address signs to put on their homes because there's a lot of gender-based violence and women who die in childbirth down there because ambulances just can't find them. So we've worked with the charity to train all the ambulance drivers and to give each household a 3-word address so they can be found. So as you said, you stole my last chart. Thanks. We're on a bit of a mission. We want to become a global standard for referring to a location because we feel that a simple way to talk about a location is fundamental to make the world a better place, both now and in the future. It can make it much more efficient for businesses, much less frustrating for individuals, and much safer, and we can actually save some lives. So that's what 3 words. Thank you.
Chris.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to probably have a few notes in front of me because I love what I do, and I could turn 12 minutes into 12 hours just like that. So anyway, really glad to be here this afternoon. I work for a company called SpaceTime Insight, so you can imagine there's a little bit of a geographic reference there. Our company, we basically provide software and service solutions to large asset-intensive industries such as electric utilities, gas transmission companies, and transportation and logistics. My role in the company is I work with all of our large logistics and transportation companies. I try to leverage my experience, and I've been in the transportation industry 35 years after being out of college, doing everything from driving trucks to building models to help them pull the thorns out of their foot, which we would call the real complicated and hard to solve problems that they have. As far as what we're going to be facing in the industry, in the transportation logistics industry as we move into 2050, is really explosive growth around the planet. You know, the human population is going to hit somewhere between 9 and 10 billion people, depending on how you look at it. We all know it's going to be moving into mega cities, mega regions. We understand we're facing that, but I think one dynamic that might, not be clearly evident is there's going to be a big migration into the middle class. So, the estimation is that's almost going to double. And what that means to us who are moving boxes around the world is that there's going to be a lot more freight to move. We're anticipating about a 400% increase between now and 2050. And not only that, because of the length of haul between mega regions and mega cities, especially with the big growth in Asia Pacific, length of haul is going to go up somewhere between 10 and 15%. I put 12 up there as a number, but basically we're going to be hauling more things, farther distances. And what that means for the industry is we got to really do three things in order to get through this. One is build more capacity. You can only play that game so long, but bigger ships, bigger aircraft, longer trains, that'll all come into play. Improve asset utilization. That's a big deal. One of the most important things I ever learned in business was from a photography teacher, which is fill the frame is the name of the game, right? And, we got to fill those assets. We got to get them up to a higher level of utilization. It's very important. And the way we're going to get that done is through technology. So what's happening, and we're seeing it as we speak, is the solutions we're bringing to the table and the problems we're facing just on a day-to-day operational basis, it's almost too much for a human to handle. So we have to have some degree of machine learning and automation in place. Talking about midstream operations, and this is where SpaceTime, we really focused our energy. So if you think about a transportation network in simple terms, you're picking product up, you're consolidating it, you're bringing it to some type of regional node, and then you have a line haul operation that takes it to a delivery regional node, then it goes into the final mile. We spent most of our time in that mid-zone for a lot of reasons. One, that it's pretty analogous to moving electrons around on a transmission grid. Same thing with moving gas around in their transmission grids and pipelines. Our focus and my focus has really been in the air mode, the ground parcel mode, and the rail modes. And I'll be walking you through a couple use cases that we've been working on with customers that I think you'll find are interesting. So thinking through these modes a little bit, and I apologize for the formatting, that's going from Mac to an IBM, so we got a little bit of a misconnection there. But so think about air, it's all about speed. The ground networks is all about flexibility, and rail is all around cost, on a per ton mile basis. But they all have their unique challenges as well in moving freight. So you get in the air business, it's very complex, and you've got very exacting schedules that you have to maintain, right? On the ground, it's more of a problem of capacity and asset utilization, and I'll get into that in a little bit more in a minute. And on the rail, it's all around operational variability, man-made variability, going through cities, congestion, natural variability caused by, global warming, climate change, topography are all issues that we face. So I'm going to go ahead and walk through a couple use cases that we've been involved in. This is the first one, is managing complexity through a planning system. So we've been working with a large air carrier for the last 2 years to really rebuild their global planning system. And the challenge that they had is their systems were about 25 years old. So they were, basically DOS-type systems where you could put data in, you could get data out, but there was no embedded operational information inside of it, no analytical capabilities, and really no geospatial visualization at all for the planners. So this company has about 250 planners around the globe, all trying to collaborate, and all their real value-added work was being done outside of the system. So what we've been working on is to rebuild a platform for them that is data rich. So you start thinking about an airline, you got airports, you got length of runways, you've got altitude, you got aircraft that have capacity issues, they have thrust in the engines, can only haul so much. All this comes into play, and then you get into like the capacity in their sortation system. So typically, it's taken them about 3 months to build a plan ahead of time. And with a changing world going on, more volume, more complexity with e-commerce, we needed to shrink that. The second thing that was going on, second dynamic, was people leaving the workforce. So, you've got 20, 25-year tenured planners in there are leaving, right? All that institutional information was leaving out of the head, and we're leaving with them, that's inside their head. And, we try to bring new planners online, and it could be anywhere from, a year to 2 years. So very, very complicated. And if there's any attrition in the way people move around the world these days from jobs, it's a really big risk to do it. So timely, expensive, and risky moving forward. So you can see this lower right-hand corner is basically, it's an interactive system, so planners all over the globe, they can go into their piece of the network, do their plans, do their scheduling. It automatically updates it in real time. They can see geospatially, the impact of their decisions. It's also networked, so, a planner in Newark can see the same, view of what a planner in the Philippines would see, for example. So really kind of networking all this together. We still have about another year to get this all in place. There are elements of it that are operational right now, but we're seeing some pretty dynamic results. The second is all around optimizing a hub operation for a ground parcel carrier. The problem here is that during peak seasons around Christmas, peak volume more than doubles. And since this particular company is not in the business to build churches for Easter, so to speak, they really need to maximize the assets of these hub operations. So in order to work through this project, we basically built a digital twin, if you will. So you look over that building on the left, that's about 500,000 square feet, costs about $1 billion to stand it up. And the saddest thing in the world if it's only running at about 60% efficiency against its operating plan, right? And that's reality. And the reason is the human beings can't keep up. So typically these buildings run 4-hour shifts during peak, and they're pumping through somewhere around 150,000 packages in that shift when they're running. The problem is where do you put your people in the building to keep the throughput going even? And then secondly, what's the scheduling on the trailers that you're putting on the door to keep the volume in balance so you don't jam up any part of the operation? In our digital twin model, and we've been deploying it, we're into about 6 hubs right now, but in validation, you can see on the top map, if you will, digital twin representation. That's about 2 hours into a sort. The first 2 hours, you can see on this line graph on the right, the optimized model and the human decision was pretty even because, they put the best mix of merchandise on the door at the beginning of the operation. However, as they had to start making decisions to change out empty trailers, putting new ones in, they lost it. And you can see it inside that little red box where it begins to diverge. And, the message here is in the bottom orb or the bottom chart, which basically inbound is on the right side, outbound is on the left side. You can see the even distribution. This is how with the optimization model built. And what we saw in this particular result was about a 30% improvement in throughput. What we've seen on the testing we've done so far, machine versus man, we're seeing about a 15% uplift. By the time you shake it all out and the humans kind of, have their issues throughout the course of a day, we expect to see, between 5 and 7%, but that's a huge number, for a company that's running millions of packages a day through their network. The last one, this is kind of cool. I like this one. This is kind of like geography on steroids. We got all the major food groups going here. We got, weather and climate. We got physical geography. We got some human geography working. And the onus of this project was to really help a particular railroad deal with climate change and deal with water issues. So when you think about water impacting a rail network, there's 3 ways it hits it. One is through inundation, right? So it rains a lot, water comes up over the track, takes about 2 inches of water to roll a locomotive. You wouldn't think that, but it's a hazardous situation. The second dynamic that hits is when storms blow in, they overwhelm some of the structure underneath the track, mainly the culverts are the really tough one there. And you can see up in that upper left-hand corner, that's a culvert that got blown out. And if you ran a locomotive across that at 70 miles an hour, you'd probably have an issue, right? The third way is in really geographic sensitive areas like alluvial fans. Water comes out of the mountains, kind of hits that bird foot's delta in the alluvial fan, hits the side of the track bed. It'll run down to a culvert or a bridge, but it'll erode and undercut that track. And again, creates a hazardous situation for the road. So, to pull the thorn out of the foot, we were charged with working with the railroad to try to kind of figure out solutions on how to give them, A, advanced warning when these events would happen, B, to help them identify vulnerable areas to where they could, allocate capital more effectively, right? And so in this world, we went through a process. We databased and geolocated, all past events. We databased all the underlying structure, the soil types, the water loads, and the engineering. And then we worked with NOAA to build a model that would recreate the atmospheric conditions and the climate conditions at the time of the event, so we could kind of build an as-is situation. Then we laid over the radar and the quantitative precipitation forecast to begin to do some predictive analytics. It got us so far, but we were still getting too many false positives. So then we worked with NOAA to take their, what they call their EF5 Ensemble flash flooding alert system, which they laid a grid of 1 kilometer cells across the entire United States where they're measuring hydrological conditions in those areas. Overlaid that against the track, created probabilities, and got to a point where we could generate alerts and identify those vulnerable areas. Our next phase are some areas that are still giving us heartburn, so we're going to put sensors, LiDAR-enabled sensors over some of those vulnerable areas, and then we're beginning to test drones to get the delta between top of track and native topography, because again, the flash flooding alert system that NOAA built is all around, property, life and property and life. So they're not thinking about, elevation from the topography. And so that'll be a 218 project. When we get that done, we think we're going to be able to, predict and send alerts that will have about a 95%, accuracy rate. So pretty excited about it. This is a great project that we've been working on. So anyway, that's kind of a flavor of what we do. The question, that's kind of been coming to play here is, what is the world going to look like in 2050? And, Dean challenged us on that and spent a little time thinking about it. And one thing that kind of came into my conscious is we're talking about a time frame that's 32 years away. Well, I've been playing in this industry for 35 plus, so gone through a couple technology cycles, gone through a couple cycles of, changes in the economy and, those type of things. So if you look outside of the circle here, these are some of the technologies that are being developed right now. And, from my experience, knowing, the technologies that were in development, 20, 25 years ago, they're in our everyday life right now. I would venture to say all these are going to make it into our world. And then inside the orb is kind of the human dimensions. And those are all going to kind of come play into the equation. And so what will happen is kind of the humans and the technology are going to interact, and to a great degree that'll lay out what the footprint looks like. One area that's big is around logistics convergence with other industries. Right now we're seeing it with Amazon, building transportation logistics capabilities. They're into retail in a big way. Just announced they're moving into healthcare. They're opening up an online pharmacy type operation. Another company you look at FedEx is coming about it from another angle. Pure play transportation company, and they're moving quickly. And then the last one is a company like Home Depot is doing the same thing. So anyway, at the end of the day, a lot of exciting things are going to happen between now and then, and it'll be fun to watch. So that's it. Thank you.
And now Keith Dierkx.
I thought it would be rather amusing, or at least ironic, when I took some notes earlier today on some of the other speakers like Dean, Shaylin, and others, that I did it on a punch card. Because I have a confession to make that when I've been with IBM twice, and the first time I left, I actually stole some office supplies. What I stole were about 20,000 punch cards because they fit perfectly in a suit pocket. And I suspect once upon a time, the reason IBM had a surplus is when they looked to the future. Do you all remember Raiders of the Lost Ark, when they finally capture the Ark and they move it into that government warehouse that CGI, it goes on for about 8 miles? Somewhere, I think, in a mountain, there is a vault full of 100 billion punch cards because the expectation was that maybe we would use them. So what I wanted to do today was talk a little bit about transitioning from cement to insight. Earlier it was mentioned about rail networks, it was mentioned about the highway system, the infrastructure things, and of course all of those things will continue, but I think to a large degree, a lot of the investments now going to be made on platforms, data, and information. And I thought as geographers, what are the things you need to be sensitive to? Because prognostication is in fact foolish, and I tried to think about that. Economists give an event and a date, but never both together. Although I think, Jamie Airbib on the Rethink X probably did as good a job of anyone of prognosticating and supporting that. So, Bill Gates, although I don't think he's been a great prognosticator, I think this statement is correct. We always overestimate the change in the next 2 years, but underestimate the next 10. And so if you remember when the iPhone came out 10 years and 2 months ago, believe it or not, the reviews were mixed. So all of a sudden now, I see two people walking down the street in Mongolia, a couple on the phone, and they're actually talking to each other on the phone, even though they're standing next to one another. So just a profound change in being able to go there. The other thing I wanted to reach out is, and I think this is pertinent to where I'm going to talk about today, what are those things we need to be sensitized to when we think about the next 30 years. Catapult Transport Systems, a colleague of mine joined them as the CEO, but Dean Wise and I and Catapult were in Moscow about a month ago. There's probably a joke there somewhere, but I'm from California, I'll leave it alone. And I thought this represented a great sense of intelligent mobility, because if you look at these topics, and I'm not going to go through them, and this will be available for you as a presentation, most of these investments and changes are data related. So it's information, it's mapping data, it's IoT, all of the types of things. So when you think about this ever onward rush of technology, I think what we can be certain of, saving Armageddon, is that in 2050, technology will be more important and more inculcated into every part of our lives. So we start thinking about information and data, but if you remember, Shailin brought up this comment about data, lots of data. And I think this continuum on the bottom, it makes a lot of sense to me. What we want to do is transform, and so geographers of the future are going to want to transform data into information, information into knowledge, and knowledge into wisdom, that insight. Because we are going to be inundated with more and more data. And when you look at this chart, interestingly to me, the types of data that we will have, and this is going to drive developments of other technologies, whether it's autonomous vehicles, trucks, whatever have you, sensor-embedded things, mapping, geospatial systems, whatever, is most of this data cannot be interpreted by traditional computing systems. Oh, and by the way, it's not an IBM PC, it's a Lenovo PC that you had a problem with. Okay, sorry. Just have to defend that as the largest user of Mac computers in the world, IBM. Either that or you guys are really a prudent startup and you're investing in 10-year-old technology.
Old habits die hard.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not going to go through this, but I think what this does is it gives you a sense when you think about the amount of data. Now, this is what's happening today. So if you think about that growth curve, apply that growth curve to these types of numbers, and again, this whole thing about being data rich but information and insight poor is probably something that we're going to need to address. And if we don't address it, then we're collecting a lot of what I would call unactionable data and information being able to do that, right? You think about a trillion connected devices on the internet. And by the way, the Internet of Things is at its early stage, because when you think about it today, we're mostly applying after manufacture a device to a thing. I think the future will be embedding this technology and smarts. And it's not just a here I am, but here I am, how I am, and potentially how I will be, where you'll actually have that level of intelligence in the things that we interact with daily. So for this conversation, one of the last frontiers of digital discovery is actually spatial temporal data. Because when you look at here, you want to look at opportunities for all of you that want to be geographers. Think about searchability today. You look at the internet, you look at business transactions, you look at social networks. Well-mined, well-understood, fake news aside, on some of the social networks, but very little has been done around spatial temporal information. And so if the argument is that data and information is going to increase, that point is certainly going to be skyrocketing, and yet little work has been done today in doing that. And yet when you think about things that were shown like the Ollie, and I'll show that as well, Teslas, all of these things, autonomous trucks, the capturing of this information, whether it's weather data, whatever have you, I'll talk about a couple of those things, that a histogram relative to spatial temporal should increase massively over time. And then again, this whole idea is it's not useful without context. So when you think about applying it, it's this multi-sensor type of overlay. So yes, it's hot, but it's also congested, and it's also whatever else you're going to add on that. And I'll show you a chart on that, right? And so in fact, the work that IBM does, you're probably very familiar with our AI and our cognitive, and you may be familiar with some of the work we're doing around digitizing global trade with blockchain. But our research organization is working today on basically how do I build a capability, a multi-layered capability, and you can see here with a master grid that I am going to take multiple types of systems and be able to make one query across multiple types of systems, multiple types of data of all sorts. So it could be image data, it could be weather data, it could be IoT and sensor data. But right now you have to make the queries on independent systems, and then you often have to do the analytics yourself. And so one of the things that IBM understands pretty well is this big data thing that we talk about. You probably couldn't have met an IBM person 5 years ago that didn't start with, "Hi, I'm big data." I think today we're, "Hi, I'm Watson." But that being aside, what our researchers look for, what are the tools that geographers in the future and business leaders and others to understand our physical environment and improve it are going to need to have. And again, you'll get all of this. Drones I thought I would just bring up because I'm topical. The only point I'd like to make is the right-hand side of this chart. Because when you think about data, a lot of this data today is pulled off of a drone or any device that's capturing information, image data. By the way, you can't put image data into a typical database. It doesn't understand what it is. So you have to use technologies like AI and other things to understand the visual data and make that interpretation through algorithms. But in the future, we're going to have smart AI chips. These chips will actually be doing the insight on the device itself. So when you think about the work that Todd talked about and Dean have talked about with BNSF in drone technology, in the future all of that will actually be done. There'll be no data latency. All of that actually is done on the drone itself. And you can see in the center here we've now got multimodal sensor arrays, so we can do LiDAR mapping, we can do weather mapping, things like all of these things. And again, the mashup and gaining the insight from the data into information, knowledge, and wisdom is really important. Weather, some of you may know that IBM bought the weather company and that we get 26 billion data point reads a day. And in fact, the interesting thing, the reason weather is so interesting for us is one is the precision of prediction, but also the localization. So when I was thinking of what 3 words, I was thinking if we could get down to weather localization into each what 3 words square, that would be a fantastic thing because then it's actionable. Let's do it. We'll do it. All right. All right. You know, I actually thought about, you know, when you think, you know, I've done a couple of startups in the Valley, and I thought about what 3 words, and maybe I should make that my social security number and my email address. And by the way, I think it would bring civil discourse back to the world, because if your location was your name, then you'd be polite because people know where you live. And so, who knows? I mean, lots of ambitions, right? But you can see just on the weather side, the types of data that we're talking about. So as you go across different sensor modalities and other things, as you're becoming, I don't know if you'd even call it a data scientist in the future, because the uh-oh slide I'm going to show you at the end is maybe something takes over for all of that. But I think in the short term for anyone in school and graduating soon, certainly an opportunity. Ollie, as shown, right? And you'll notice I gave a shout out to what 3 words. By the way, we didn't coordinate our presentation, so it's either great minds think alike or it's a low threshold, one or the other. But it's a combination of all of these things, right? It's an Internet of Things. It's when we think about travel and transportation, how these technologies are going to be impacting that in the future. I think Ollie's a great example, right? Geospatial information, the Internet of Things, how am I doing? And so you start seeing built into all sorts of transportation devices today, hundreds if not thousands of sensors that do all sorts of analysis and real-time predictive capability about when a locomotive or a motor freight or an ocean carrier all would need to be able to change those things. And AI is going to be a big interpreter of the world and being able to do that. I wanted to bring this on because we think about transportation, but I think Shaylin or someone others mentioned. I'm a good couple minutes? Yeah? Okay, I want to do that. Conversational travel platforms. We thought about, you know, freight and logistics and rail and trucking, but what we're beginning to see now, and we have a couple clients already starting to use this, is South by Southwest earlier this year, the idea of an app is kind of going away. This idea of being always connected. Because another thing, although I didn't mention it, is bandwidth will only get more ubiquitous and faster in the future. And so what we're seeing now is, and again, from a geographer's perspective, location-based services where when I'm traveling, I have an AI, and it's much more than a chatbot, that knows who I am, knows what my preferences are, and is constantly in contact with me on my device, making recommendations for me, my family members, and others as I travel. We actually have a client in the European rail industry, passenger rail industry, that's actually doing this today. So think about this thing. It's an engine that never stops, constantly learns, is constantly updating and modifying its recommendations to you as you travel. And again, a lot of that's going to be geo and spatially related information. Blockchain, I'm sure you've all heard of it. It's not Bitcoin, but it's this idea of an immutable platform, a shared ledger that gives provenance of things. And so Internet of Things, spatial data, weather data, all of this geo mapping type of information is being added in. This is an example of a supply chain, and you can see geo-specific certificates and other things. And this is actually a program that IBM and Maersk, the world's largest container shipping company, are doing today. And again, we'll have time afterwards to talk about it. So, and one last wild card. This is kind of interesting. Everything I said could change because there's this thing called quantum computing. And I don't know if you heard, there's a race on, if you will, DeepMind, IBM, others. We just announced a 50-qubit computer. But there's something called Shor's algorithm, which is factoring two prime numbers. And I think to solve the problem in a classic computer takes a number of years that's much longer than the Earth has existed to actually solve that problem. And a quantum computer promises to solve it in 100 seconds. So when you think about careers going into the future, yeah, scary. You think about cryptography, you think about all this cyber stuff. When you think about careers going into the future, what I really don't know, and that's at least one of the wild cards, and that's about technology we know. So I'm going to end on this chart, which is, this talks about AI and how it'll have the same power as humans. And you notice there's very little filling of the lake, and then all of a sudden, boom, it fills up again. So the advances being made in technology, the relentlessness that I talked about, that for me is a certainty in 2050. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Well, that was an amazing group of presentations, and I feel as though I'm in some sort of a sci-fi movie about the future. And that's actually the first question I wanted to ask the panel before we open it up. And I warned them. I said, okay, which sci-fi novel or movie best portrays 2050 for you from your perspective? And I thought about this because I've just finished reading Kim Stanley Robinson's New York 2040, which is New York after several meters of sea level rise, and I just saw Blade Runner 2. So you don't all have to answer it, but I'm interested to see where you think we might be going and who's portrayed it well.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. 2001, Space Odyssey, although Pan Am doesn't exist anymore, but it talked about a very practical future. But if you remember, there's the monolith in the past with humans, then there's the monolith as mankind expands on the moon and then expands out into the solar system. But the real reason it's my favorite movie is that Kubrick equated HAL, and I don't know if you know where I'm going with this, but H plus 1 is I, A plus 1 is B, and L plus 1 is M. And so HAL represents IBM. And I just want to let you know that we're the kinder, gentler AI going into the future. So
You said that in such a sinister way.
Chris?
So I'm a bit of a history buff, and I always kind of look at life that if you want to understand what's coming, look at the past. So I like Back to the Future is probably my favorite. It's a little bit sappy. It's a little bit of a comedy, but you know, kind of seeing what's happening in the world right now, if you have a keen eye for observation and you're somewhat perceptive, you know, you can see what the world is kind of building to. My example of that is like I drive between the Atlanta airport and my house on all my business trips. I've drove it for years and I've been using Uber now, and I'm looking at the landscape and they're saying that in 10 years Atlanta's going to double in population, be over 10 million. And you're watching it being built in front of your eyes. So it's, you know, pretty exciting times.
What's the line from that? Where we're going, we don't need roads? but you still need an address.
Okay.
Some of it.
There you go. Giles, you've got
No,
to,
that's it.
you're going to leave that. Okay. And then the second question I'd like to ask is, I found all three of your presentations sort of relentlessly optimistic solutions looking forward. Have you got any downside you'd like to sort of thinking forward to 2050?
Well, yeah, so I'll start just kind of on the AI theme. So if you listen to Elon Musk, who we heard a lot about today, and if you listen to Stephen Hawking and others, as we start building more and more of this AI, there's a concern about its ability to decide that maybe the biggest threat to the planet is us. And then you get into a Skynet scenario, if you all know the Terminator reference, being able to do that. But you know, my bigger worry is, I think, not the dramatic one, but the boil the ocean slowly one, where all of a sudden things start to be taken away from us and we hardly notice it. So I think I'm more of a half full than a half empty person, but technology I'm not one of those, being a historian of science, that believes technology is in and of itself neutral. I think there are some technologies that can fall on the good or the bad side of the ledger, and I think we have to be very careful.
I think there's a lot of, when people imagine like the city of the future, they buy up a piece of land and they build it from scratch. And I actually think that there's a massive challenge in trying to understand how to fix what we have today. And if the UN said that 50% of people who live in cities don't have an address, and by, 2050, 70% of the world's population will live in urban centers. And so we're piling people into a system which is, which can't currently cope. And so I think that's a worry and a big challenge, as more and more people just group into cities without the appropriate infrastructure in place.
Yeah, my concern is really how commercial exchange is going to occur. If, all of our jobs, even in the professional class, become automated. So what do we do to exchange money? And it's interesting, like when I'm on my travels, every once in a while I'll talk to folks, and I met a young man who's a brilliant mathematician, who's a Bitcoin trader, and I never knew there was such a thing, but there is. And that was the question I posed to him: how are we going to, get money flowing between people so we can survive? And then you start getting into discussions. There'll be some sort of global minimum wage that everyone will have, like a stipend. And then the questions come in of who decides that, how's it allocated, and then also what will the informal economy look like going forward? Because I always love to talk to the Uber drivers in New York. It's fascinating. Everyone I talk to is a former cabbie, and I always ask them, "Are you making more money?" And they go, "Nope." And then why are you doing it? Because I have more flexibility and freedom. So it's interesting what's going on out there.
Okay. Well, I think we could open up to the audience. There are a couple of mics if people have questions for one or more of the presenters. So, yes, sir.
So if we're dealing with what 3 words, can we move to what 4 or 5 words so that we can have a z-coordinate and a time hack?
We are looking at vertical axis. Yep. One of the major challenges in vertical is indoors. And the systems that we have in place at the moment for locating people indoors are incredibly expensive and just not very good. Now our grid obviously works inside, and we are looking at height, but there's plenty of the world that's flat that we can that we've got to deal with first. But yes.
What 3 words brought this to mind, but I'm kind of interested in all the responses. I was glad to hear some more talk of social justice issues, the voting idea that many more billions of people have the potential to vote is very encouraging. Is there any actual momentum towards that on the governmental side, or more just NGOs or that type of thing? And then broadly, just how the other presenters see their tech kind of working towards social justice issues as well.
I think, from my perspective, it's we're unashamedly a business with a purpose, and we're trying to do good and do business at the same time. And we don't think that they should be mutually exclusive. We're trying to do the right thing, and I think more and more people gravitate to businesses who are behaving like that. We are talking to a number of different governments. we have just signed a deal with a West African country where we will become the infrastructure, addressing infrastructure for the country, and so it will be legally recognized on your birth certificate and on your voting forms. So yeah, we're pushing forward with governments as well as NGOs and NATO and the Red Cross and many others.
Yeah, and then for us, of course, as you know, for many years we had a program called Smarter Planet, and I think there's an assumption that if we have better data, that continuum I talked about to wisdom can actually be achieved. So I think that, the more information we have, the more transparent we are about that. IBM has always been a leader, whether it's among the first women executives in technology ever, the LGBTQ community, and those types of things. So IBM does believe that a big part of what we do is fundamental to unlocking that insight and wisdom and applying it to social justice.
In our world, it comes from two dimensions. One, we help our customers operate their assets more efficiently, so hopefully lowering the footprint. You need less capacity to move more freight, and that's going to become more and more important as we move into the future. I think the other dimension in our particular company, we're very global. We're small, about 150 people, but the teams who I work with, they're located everywhere from lower New Zealand to Japan, up into Canada, Russia, Japan, and China. They're working on any given project. So a lot of perspectives and a lot of different, kind of worldviews are coming together to put these projects in place.
Any others? Okay, well, there's a lot of school teachers here, and some of us teach students. I'm teaching a really giant class right now, and I'll probably go back on Tuesday and tell them a little bit about what I heard today. And a couple of you touched on the issue of what students today need to do to prepare for the future. But for people teaching geography, for students studying geography, or more broadly, what do you think some of the key skills are? And are you worried about the problems with STEM education, for example, in terms? So the real question is, if one of my students wants to be like you guys in 2050, what should they do with their lives?
Stop.
Well, it's interesting. Walter Isaacson, the author, has just come out with a book on Da Vinci, and of course he wrote a book on, I think, Franklin, and of course the Steve Jobs book and other things. And he talked about the difference wasn't that they were smart, because there's lots of smart people. It's that they were interested in many things across many domains and were able to bring all of that together in a very synergistic way. So
That's a geographer.
Exactly, to my point. So, for all the world of specialization, I think this idea of stepping back and having that broader perspective from STEM to the arts is a differentiator, I think, for a lot of people. I happen to live in the Bay Area, and it's the Beat generation has now been replaced by the Facebook, Apple, Netflix, Google generation, FANG, right? I think that's what they call it in San Francisco. And the artist community is now mostly out of the city. So I think if you're a geographer, STEM plus the liberal arts and humanities.
Yeah, in my mind, what I've been doing for, it seems like forever, there's a huge technology element to it, and that's getting more and more specialized. It'll probably be tough for someone without a degree or experience in that world to enter into it, but from a geographer's point of view, to your point, kind of the consolidation of knowledge coming at it from different perspectives is important. I think just remembering the power of the map. I've used that in my career to really do what I've done for 35 years. I approach a problem, the first thing I do in my head is I start mapping it out, and then I think kind of thinking through those geographic skills, laying out grids across a problem, looking at flows, looking at distance and direction. Those basics are as true today as they were in the past.
Yeah, I'd echo it. I'm sorry to admit it, but I'm actually a physicist. Sorry, but I studied physics, maths, and art. So trying to pull together those two things, and what I kind of advise my kids on is creativity, lateral thinking, and kind of flexibility are going to be key, because that's going to be the kind of big differentiator when tasks become automated and repetitive and taken by other people. I think creativity is going to be fundamental and key.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions from the floor? In that case, I'm going to give you a minute if you want to say anything else, the question you wish you'd been asked, or just sort of wrap up where Geospatial's going for 2050, and then we'll wrap up.
one of the geographers, I think, to take that.
You bet. Maps and geospatial analytics and technologies are just going to increase in importance as the world becomes more dense and there's more activity. So you got a great future ahead of you. It'll be a lot of fun.
I couldn't do better than to mirror that, so
Okay.
thank you.
Well, if you'd like to join me in thanking a really terrific panel, and we've got another one coming up.